yes. This is a bit surreal, but hi everyone. Happy to see everyone here. I'm not too sure who all are here, and I hope that more people than just folks from Dakshin and Dakshin affiliates are here. So for those who don't know me, I'm Aarti Sridhar. I'm the program head of this program. It's called Communities and Resource Governance. It's one of Dakshin's oldest programs. And as with many programs, maybe you've heard the others also say this, but we started really small with one and a half people. And we've had a lot of people, and sometimes we've not had that many people. But today we have three folks joining. Myself, Marianne Manuel, and Vinita Venugopalan. I'm just going to ask quickly Marianne and Vinita to also just introduce themselves.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Marianne. If those of you who were here for the first session, I've already introduced myself as the associate director, but the work that I do apart from the management of Dakshin is in association with the Communities and Resource Governance Program. And I actually joined the program in 2011 as a research assistant. So I've been working in this program for a long time. And I focus mainly on coastal development policy. And a lot of my work has been on the CRZ, the Coastal Regulation Zone notification. And I work very closely with fishing communities and fish worker networks that are there in India on policy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vinita. I joined Dakshin to work with the fishing communities in Odisha in supporting them to strengthen their claims over coastal commons. We were mapping their coastal commons and discussing with them what are the various environmental laws and how they can use it to use it for better governance rights, having more control over decision making and all of that. And I also support Marianne in working with used to support. I'm currently not with Dakshin, but still around, sort of part of the extended network. Support Marianne with networking and environmental policy analysis.
Yeah. So just to, I mean, we have a lot of questions today, and I hope the people who've asked the questions are also here by now. It's been a very long day. So we'll just do a super quick introduction to what our program broadly deals with. Marianne, can you move this slide, the next one? Yeah, just, so the CRG program, as I said, has been there from a long time. And in many ways, I think we have tried to operationalize one part of Dakshin's mission, which is really to focus on environmental justice. Now, of course, all of the programs try to do this in their own ways. But of course, many people associate environmental justice with law and policy and so on. And so we find ourselves also doing projects that centrally deal with this question of justice in conservation work or in environmental work. So when we started work initially, I think we started, of course, all of us are interested in coastal and marine ecosystems, but we started off by being quite clear that what we saw for coastal areas, like coastal conservation measures, they needed to be very different from what we were seeing in forest systems. So most importantly, that this whole idea of keeping ecosystems pristine and keeping people out of it was just it was not acceptable ethically, and it was also not really viable in terms of conservation goals. So that was the major amount of work that we initially started doing, just to contest these conservation laws that were exclusionary. So, and the one big component of our work is to try and bring back fishers into the conversation about development. The next slide, please. Marianne, could you move the slide?
1 second. Yeah, sorry. Some lag.
Yeah, so I guess our core work, I mean, if you have to set us apart from the other programs, is that most of the time we find ourselves working on laws and policies. And this involves trying to educate ourselves, educate other conservationists, educate community people and government officials and so on about various aspects of law. trying to also reform those laws because we see them having sometimes negative impacts on fishing communities, especially the small scale. Another set of things that we do is to really strengthen networks. And we don't believe that you can actually achieve too much change in India by just working as isolated NGOs. You have to hold hands with others and work together. And in this, we try to do as much of the ground up work rather than only work at much higher scales of policy. And more recently, we've been, I think, trying to emphasize the role of commons as a central ideological and as a more methodological approach to actually governing not just coastal spaces, but all spaces. And in this, Vinita has been helping us quite a bit, and she can share a bit more. So just over to Marianne.
So, I mean, like the rest of the programs, we work in different coastal states of India. Now, the Orissa, Tamil Nadu, and the Andamans are some of Dakshin's long-term sites, and they're also sites where the governance program engages. And we have from time to time also engaged in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. We also do a lot of our work. We consider it national because it's working with national networks. So it's not site specific as such. In terms of methods, our work is basically at its core collaborative and collective action, and that's really what defines how we go about doing our work. So it could be collaborative research, it could be collaborative action on policy, or informal, strengthening informal governance systems in sites. So we work very closely with local leaders who then become our sort of conduits to getting this information and this training across to the rest of the community, and become our partners in sort of gathering the community together. And so a lot of our work is to strengthen local leadership. And as Aarti said, we do a lot of work with networks. So we are very much embedded in local networks, state level networks, national networks, and even regional networks. I'll put a link in a chat later. There was, over the last year, there have been regional conversations around this idea of blue economy, where the coasts and your oceans are the next sort of economic frontier to be explored. And so a range of civil society organizations in India and other countries in the Indian Ocean region came together and did a series of workshops, basically gathering testimonies from fishers and from fishing community members on the impacts of different aspects of this blue economy. So I'll put a link to, there's a website, so you can go and watch these tribunals that have happened and kind of understand a little bit more about this if you're interested. But the other national network that we work very closely with is the National Fish Workers Forum, which is a network of fisher unions across the country, and the National Coastal Protection Campaign, which is a combination of this National Fish Worker Forum plus different NGOs like Dakshin that work on different aspects of coastal and marine conservation. So it could be fisher rights, it could be coastal development, etc. Vinita?
Yeah. Next slide.
Yeah. Do you want to take the slide? Okay, so as Aarti said, some of the core work is
I can take
to demystify laws. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So to demystify what demystification means, we translate the laws into local languages. Like CR said, we had translated into Bengali and Tamil, and we break down the laws into from the legal language into simple, easy to understand languages, and also does the analysis of what it means, what are the implications of this for the community, are the procedural safeguards followed, how does it fit in with the larger legislative framework. And we don't work this in isolation. We work with the local communities. A lot of time we do this legal analysis to support NCPC and NFF. And so thus we take the inputs from the ground and then incorporate. We also work in collaboration with the national networks, with other organizations. For example, we would have looked into the biodiversity laws. We have looked into the environment impact assessment notification, marine fishery policy, as Abel and all said, and then CR said section has done, consistently been working on both coastal regulations on and island protections on, and then promoting realistic public engagement with the law. I mean, how can people, common people, engage with this? How does how does the section impact their day-to-day engagement with their spaces? These are some of our publications. It's an explainer on coastal commons. Commons are spaces of shared use where the users set certain norms. For example, fishing community. I can see Magadaji in the audience. They have certain norms on using the marine common spaces and beach spaces. And a lot of time they're users of these spaces, like repairing the boards, repairing the net. Such uses are not discussed in, or they are invisible in the mainstream development discourse, so we bring it forward. And these are the CRZ handbooks, so you can see colored and in a manner that is easy to explain. Next slide. Marian, next slide. Yeah. So Indian fisheries and also generating knowledge on Indian fisheries. Like you will be amazed by the extent of diversity, both cultural as well as social. The type of fishing crafts and gears, different types of nets used, different types of boards used, and different parts and different fishing techniques, and that works to produce such knowledge. And also, even if you look at Odisha, there are Bengali fishers, there are fishers of Bengali origin, fishers of Telugu origin, and who fish on the mostly on the sea, and there are fishers of mostly of the Odia origin. They are fish on the Chilika Lake, and then community process of governance and knowledge. In different fishing systems, they have different governance system. In Odisha, we have village committees, and in Tamil Nadu, we have other community institutions. And there are certain norms, like certain nets are allowed, certain times you shouldn't be fishing, and these norms are often derived from the knowledge they have accumulated over time. And yeah, this is one, the map you see is the one we produced in Odisha while working with the village committee and the other committee members. So it shows the coastal commons of Odisha. What are the areas that have been traditionally used by the fishing communities? What are its uses, and what is the CRZ, coastal regulation zone, it falls into? We have even listed the revenue details so that the uh, community can better protect its commons. Thank you.
Yes, so that brings us to the end of our presentation. So now we'll jump into the questions that many of you have given already when you were registering. And then if there are any other questions, sparked by something we have said, please put it in the chat.
Okay. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Vinita. So we will begin with the question answer session. So the first question is by Ashwit Shetty. You could unmute yourself and ask follow-up questions, or you could clarify further. So the question is, how do you guys share or explain your knowledge regarding coastal policies, which might be complex, to local stakeholders in a simplified way? How is the meeting organized for the local stakeholders? So this is a question which did get a little bit covered in the presentation, but maybe you could expand on it more, especially the second part. So
sure. So I think, as we said in the presentation, a lot of the demystifying work, it refers to the fact that our laws are written in a very complicated, unnecessarily complicated way, perhaps. And so part of it is to just simplify and cut to the heart of what this law is trying to say, and then translate it, because our laws are published only in Hindi and English, to make sure that it's available in the local languages that these communities practice. So, and how we hold these meetings or training workshops, etc., is we work very closely with usually the local fisher union. So most of our country has a fisher union, or there would be a local governance institution. As I said, the National Fish Workers Forum is a network that we work very closely with. And so they have a membership of local unions from across the coastline of India. And so we work very closely with that local union to mobilize the community together to attend these meetings. And we also ensure that we give sort of additional kind of focus to training the leaders within the community. And when I say leaders, it's the people that the community recognize as their leaders, or in other words, their problem solvers. And so we try to make sure that these people have access to the information that they might need to speak up on behalf of the community, to engage with government officials, to, if there's a public consultation, to be able to put the points of the community forth in these sort of public spaces. Yeah, so if you want more detail, then please ask for it, but this is it. This is very broadly the process.
Does that answer your question, Ashwit? You could unmute yourself and yeah, he's replied on the chat. Thank you. Yeah, so the next question is by Roshni. How can the government have a more hands-on approach to local communities where the communities can better access them? Like, it's also linked to, you right now talked about how, the laws are complex. And yeah, so if you could talk about that. Roshni, if you are in the audience and if you would want to unmute yourself and
if you want to add anything to your question, Roshni, go ahead and can add. So basically, over the years that we've also worked, we've seen the way that governments engage with communities also change, right? So even to this point of the law itself might get published in Hindi and English, but now we see that when draft policies are coming out, the courts have said that it should be available in local language. And so we see oftentimes that there are attempts being made to translate. Quality of translation is a different matter, but these steps are being made to at least translate these drafts in order to facilitate an engagement. The other way is, and actually when we think about it, the central government might not be very accessible to a lot of these communities, but they do have access to their local government. So they have access to district collectors, to the local fisheries department and fisheries officials. So the fisher unions and the fisheries department often know each other quite well, because they are the two groups that have to engage with each other, not just about policy, but on fisheries schemes and subsidies and a range of other fisheries management issues as well. And so these are the people that the local community engages with, and these are the people that we also engage with more often in terms of because again, these officials change from time to time. And so to reorient them to the legislations, to what their responsibilities might be as the head of, say, the Coastal Zone Management Authority or the district level committee of a CRZ. And so these are some ways that communities can get access. And one of the things that we keep talking about at Dakshin, not just in the governance program, is this idea of decentralization. How can we have processes within law that then decentralize some decision making, monitoring for sure, but a certain amount of management as well to the local level, to the district level, to even a village level. And so if you were here for the fisheries presentations, you'd have seen how the fisheries program is trying to do that for fisheries management. And it's a similar philosophy that we try and talk about in all of our programs and all of our projects. How can communities be more involved in decision making for policy, right? How can they be explicitly asked for policy input? So those are some of the things that we work on towards bridging, kind of making government and communities come closer together.
Thanks for answering.
No problem.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Roshni. Moving on to the next question. It's by
the way, Vinita and Aarti, you have anything to add to my answers, please do. Yeah, go ahead, Raga.
Yeah, so the next question is by Nikita. And she's asked a three-part question. So the first thing is, how do the conservation efforts impact local communities? Second is, what are your thoughts on land sharing approach to conservation? And third is, how are traditional knowledge systems utilized and protected? And actually, it's a four-part question. And the fourth is, what are the possibilities?
Then we'll do one at a time. So the first one is, how does conservation impact communities, right? So I'll give you a short answer. There's a film actually. So I'm going to plug now. One of the things I do is also work with the comms team. So I'm going to do a communications plug. We have a YouTube channel on which there is a film called Chronicles of Oblivion. And it actually looks at this very question: how do communities get stuck between sort of the forces of development, but also the forces of conservation? So what are the implications of conservation on fishing communities? The film is set in Orissa, and it's a few years old now, but it's still very relevant to this question. So do check out the film, check out our YouTube channel, subscribe, all of those things. But yes, conservation does impact communities, as Aarti said in the very beginning, right? The sort of traditional conservation that's come from the terrestrial model is on keeping communities outside of spaces, right? Creating protected areas into which communities are not allowed. And that has, of course, significant impact even in terrestrial systems, but in marine systems where people have been living off the oceans and with the oceans for, from time immemorial in some sense, it does have a huge impact when you suddenly say exclude fishers from a space. So some of the work that the biodiversity resource, Dakshin's work, where we categorize this neatly into 4 programs, it doesn't mean that all questions of governance are only handled by, the governance program. So the biodiversity program, for instance, while they're working in Orissa on turtle conservation, is very conscious of the fact that bans on fishing during turtle nesting period has an impact on that community. So some of the work of that program is also to try and mitigate the conflict between turtles and fishers as a result of some of these kind of top-down conservation measures and some of these marine conservation policies that are very exclusionary and not very inclusive and collaborative in how they are set up. Second part, Pragya.
Yeah.
Oh yes, as Aarti said, Bipro is one of our field assistants in Orissa who's here along with Magata. Bipro's mother is featured in the film that I was mentioning, Chronicles of Oblivion. So yes, you go ahead, Pragya.
Yeah, so the second part is, what are your thoughts on land sharing approach to conservation?
I'm not quite sure what you mean, but if you're talking about this, right, setting aside spaces for conservation,
just one second. I think Nikita is there in the audience, so if you would like to
Do you want to
clarify or add on.
Is that what you mean, like setting aside, marine protected areas and
yeah, like protected zones and not protected zones? How does that work in the marine?
So it doesn't necessarily, like, we don't have a proven record of this working very well. Now, this maybe actually is a better question for our biodiversity program, because they do look at, in the governance program, and I'll give this caveat, is in the governance program, we spend a lot of time looking at communities and how they manage the resources that they engage with. And we look at coastal development policy, but we do have the fisheries program and the flagships program that we work very closely with if it's a question of fisheries policy, right? Because I'm not a fisheries expert necessarily. And so the MPA, the Marine Protected Area question, I mean, if any of the BRM team members are here, please jump in. But so Dakshin's own philosophy is that we don't need a marine resources, barring things, static resources like say coral reefs, but a lot of the resources, especially when you're talking about fisheries and things, are moving resources. So turtles, for example, right? So setting this very fixed, drawing a line on a map and a circle and saying, or whatever shape, and saying that this is a marine protected area, no one is allowed to go in here because it's important. We don't think that is the most effective way of doing conservation. We believe that you need to set aside areas, if you're going to set aside areas, in conversation with the community, so that you're setting aside the most appropriate area and you're doing it in a manner that works for that particular systems, right? So it doesn't have to be a fixed spatial area. It could be time bound. So there are different methods of creating marine protected areas that people have tried. And I think our laws have also expanded from having these marine protected areas in the kind of old fashioned sense to having community conservation areas. And they've created new legal technology, locally managed marine areas. Exactly. So there's new terminologies also that are, and concepts that are coming into law to try and make even the setting up of these spaces more inclusive, which to me speaks to the realization that you do need to have more inclusive processes. And it's not enough to have these top-down decisions made by a few people, ways of deciding this land or ocean sharing. Also, ironically, because the land or ocean sharing applies to only a certain group of people, other groups of people still have access, right? Tourists still have access to national parks. If needed, an industry will get access to it. So end of the day, some of this land sharing is very strictly implemented with local communities and that land, and not so much the rest of us. Aarti?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing, that when you're saying land sharing, I think one of the problems that we have, or at least the CRG program in its alignment with various fish workers, we find that there's no sharing as such, like who has to share with whom? Is the government supposed to share with with communities? So I think one of the big puzzles is who owns property, or who owns the commons, or in whose name are these lands. So I think that for coastal areas, it's only slowly that people are starting to study this. And one of the ways that we have been doing this is through mapping. And I think that Vinita will be talking about that a little later, perhaps, so she can clarify. But the major problem is not this, it's not this very peaceful situation of just sharing resources. There's a lot of conflict also, because there's contestation over who has the right to it. So sea, like whether it's sea tenure or land tenure, I think that is central to the whole thing, to actually first establish who has rights. Only then can you start talking about, who should, what sort of like biodiversity, what sort of logic should really apply to that place. And I think that's the position that we sort of work from. You want to add something, Vinita? Maybe,
Yeah, I think this is
we
a
can
good
also
time.
perhaps like explain this through some very, tangible examples.
Yeah, Vinita, I think this would be a good time to talk about the commons work.
Yeah. To elaborate on the mapping, as Aarti said, one of the first things we did was to look into who has the access and who has the control. By coastal commons, we refer to like beach spaces, sand dunes, mangroves that the traditional fishing communities and other coastal communities have been using and for a long time, and they have their own certain norms also. I mean, people can, for example, in Purnabandha, there are people can hourly fish in a certain area. That is of course, that is a marine usage, but coastal spaces also have certain norms associated with them. So we looked into the legal framework. I mean, what is the, what are the land categories of revenue land categories? And there are common lands that are not supposed to be. We realize that there are common lands that are not supposed to be diverted either for cultivation or for development. And so then we can see where these lands were encroached, where they, where they diverted. There are even judgments on commons and village commons and protecting. And there are different categories of lands where certain activities are permissible, certain activities are not permissible. These are the revenue restrictions from the revenue side. Then we looked into the restrictions from the coastal, CRZ side, coastal regulation zone. Of course, as like every legislation, it has its own deficiencies and it has its own points. But one of the ways we do is we work with the existing laws. We'll of course critique the existing laws. Parallelly, we'll also see how can we move forward, how can we make better use of the existing laws. So it's a combination. So even that comes with certain restrictions, and it has certain provisions for the fishing communities. And thirdly, we looked into what are the spaces, who uses these spaces. So by analyzing the first two laws, CRZ, as well as the state land laws and revenue acts, we got an idea who has the legal ownership and who has control. Then next we looked into who uses this, who are the traditional users, how has their users changed over time, and who are the new users, and what are the conflicts. Because even at the very local settings, like there would be an area that used by the fishing community traditionally to dry the fish. We had an instance where the municipality, without telling anybody, dumped waste on that area. They plan to make it into a dumping site without consulting the community, and at night, like sort of like you are doing some illegal activity, which they were. Because according to the waste management, so the village committee members, Magadaji and all of that, they informed us, and we both together, we all looked into it. And we realized that it was a space and coming under CRZ. I forgot the exact category now, but you can't dump waste in that category without getting prior permission from the Pollution Control Board. It is stated clearly in the CRZ Acts as well as the waste management laws. So with this information, Magadaji was able to um, uh, talk to the municipal authorities and collectorate and everything, get it, force them to go back on that. So this is an instance where the government, there is no sharing involved. Government is just trying to take away the commons where people used to dry their fish and everything. And there are between communities, fishing communities are not the only costly communities, other costly communities. What are the, everybody has to live together, and if we want to take care of the coastal area, if there are some ecological damage, everybody's lives and livelihoods are dependent on it. So you have to work with all the communities, not just fishing communities. You have to work in consensus. That's sort of what we try to do. Yeah. I don't know if I have answered the question or if I lost the thread somewhere.
No, I think that was a good overview of the work also, and I think it gives a clear example of the process of land sharing that we think how land sharing should happen versus how it does happen in so many places. Yeah. What was the next one, Pragya?
Yeah. So the next question is, how are traditional knowledge systems utilized and protected?
Vinita, do you want to just, because again it ties in with the Commons project, you can use that as an example.
Yeah. So along with the Commons project, one of the things we did was, as I said, map the existing users and the past users and how they have shifted over time. So that will give you a lot of, the process itself will generate a lot of traditional knowledge. For example, this particular plant, this is used for this, the particular fish, it is supposed to be good for your eyes and everything. But we haven't deliberately tried to document traditional knowledge, and it was a thought out decision. Because a lot of time, even though India has global level, we have the Convention on Biodiversity. India, we have the Biological Diversity Act, and it has provisions for sharing access benefit, sharing the benefits of the access with the communities. Oftentimes, a lot of time, exploitation happens. So we are very careful that when we use traditional knowledge, when we document traditional knowledge, it should be to strengthen the claims of the communities over their spaces. Otherwise, we may not have much of a control over how these will be used. But the traditional knowledge can also, as I said, can be used for community. Hey, we have been doing this. We know these things. That shows that our control and our continued use of this space. If you look at Adivasi communities, different, one of the ways they do forest right act is like, I have worked a bit in it. Sometimes this fishing and Adivasi communities come together. So one where they claim right to the areas in forest is that they have local names of different areas in forest, and that is the way they claim their rights. Similarly, that is sort of the way that we are working with communities, not just we, there are other organizations, Coastal Resource Center in Chennai, for example, working with the fishing communities. These are the users. We have been using it in this manner, and then mapping and then documenting it. Because when there is no documentation available, it often goes ignored in the mainstream development discourse. So fishing communities in Chennai, they were able to map their areas, and when there was a coastal road project, they were able to say if this coastal road comes in this area, this is the area that we have been using for these many years. These are these uses, and what are you going to do about this? So they were able to assert their claims. So that is one way that we hope to use traditional knowledge of the users as well as of the spaces to assert these claims.
Thank you, Vinita. Miriam, you want to add something?
No.
Okay, so the next question by Nikita is, what are the possibilities in this field? Nikita, would you want to elaborate on what kind of possibilities you mean?
I think I was referring to in terms of how to contribute, but then it's been answered in multiple ways already. So I'd just like to say this has been very insightful. Thank you so much for answering the questions.
Thanks, Nikita.
Thank you for asking those questions. So our next question is by Aditya Kapoor. I don't think he's here, but if you are, kindly unmute yourself and ask any follow-up questions. So the question is, what role does tourism play in affecting indigenous communities with their land? Vinita, would you want to take this?
It depends on the type of tourism. Whether the tourism is tourist centric or community centric. If it is tourist centric, then it can have a lot of negative repercussions. One of the examples is that of the blue flag certification. So blue flag certification is a certification given to the beaches in all over the world. It's a global consortium. Where they categorize beaches according to certain categories, and some of these criteria can be problematic. For example, if you say a beach should be like, there have been instances where fishers' boats have been classified as litter. And so in situations like this, fish workers lose access to the commons. There have been instances where in Goa, when beaches were about to be certified as blue flag, the local fishing community protested against it because their concerns are like, so if you say that this beach is blue flag and so only certain beach beautification, beach has to be sort of conformed to a sort of artificial, maybe European aesthetics of what tourist-centric aesthetics of what it should look like, then where will we keep our boats? Where will we mend our nets? Where will we keep our, and what about, and there have been even instances that tourists do not want the typical fish smell associated with the coastal spaces. That can also lead to dislocation of fishing communities from these spaces. So essentially, it can lead to loss of livelihood, loss of control over those spaces. So any tourism initiative has to be community centric. The control should lie with the community. How it has to be designed from the conceptualization stage, it has to be led by the community. Otherwise, most often what happens, the community loses jobs, and even due to fish crisis in fishery sector, fish workers are working as small vendors in the beach. And then when you give the beach or contract to big people with certain looks and style and certain type of managing the stalls and everything, the fishing community, people from fishing community are again kicked out from the secondary livelihood that they picked up, second livelihood that they picked up. So that shouldn't happen. They have to be involved, and it is they who should be leading the process.
Thank you, Vinita. There is another question by Astha. How do you choose the communities to work with?
Sometimes it's really practical. Astha, when I joined Dakshin, Aarti was already working in Orissa, and my Hindi is really terrible. My Odia is non-existent. So that was just not an option for me. Because one of the things you realize is that when you work with translators, it's not as effective. And so that's actually how the work in Tamil Nadu began, is because I'm from Chennai and I might not be 100% fluent in Tamil, but it's definitely way better than my Hindi. And so that's how we began working in, like directly working in Tamil Nadu. We, of course, had partners there because of the networks work that we do, but we ourselves as researchers had not, worked there consistently. So that's how Tamil Nadu became a site for the Communities and Resource Governance Program. So it's a practical decision sometimes, and it's a need-based decision also. So because of the networks, because the other programs also work in different sites, an issue might come up that requires the community and requires the CRG program to get involved. And so that's how we might start working, so that's how some of the work, say in Andhra Pradesh or in Karnataka, which aren't long-term sites, that, we're not always doing work in these sites, but it's because of some sort of need that has emerged from the ground, from partners or from, within the organization.
Thank you, Marianne. Related to this is a question by Sunaina, in the sense that you talked about the language barrier. So she has asked, how do you overcome the language barrier, if any, while doing the field work? So, Vinita,
One
do you
is
want
to make sure there isn't, but Vinita, you want to?
I think I am qualified
Very
to
applicable to you, yes.
because I was working in Odisha and I neither knew Odia nor Telugu because Ganjam has a lot of fishes of Telugu origin and my Hindi is terrible. So so when you start the work, you can manage with the help of setting, making sure that there are certain mechanisms in place. I relied a lot on my colleague Biswa, who is Odia speaking. So before we would go to the field, we would discuss, these are the questions that we will ask. This is the main themes. And while attending the interviews and all, we would take notes and then come back and we would again have that discussion. And Biswa was also very kind enough to share his field notes with me. But as Marian said, as time progresses, I mean, this can work. And I think I did a satisfactory job. Of course, Viproji and Magadaji even are more qualified to comment on it than me. But since we got the map completed, I think, yeah, the strategy has been successful. But as Marian said, the quality of interaction you are not able to get completely when you don't know the language. I feel more at ease when I am working in Kerala. So over time, begin with, you can rely on the strategies. Over time, you have to work on the language and learn the language.
Yeah, to clarify, no, you don't need to be fluent in a language to build relationships, but you might need to be fluent in a language to properly understand what the issue is, because if you're relying on a third person to translate, you never know if, because people, depending on who is receiving information, you also interpret information differently, right? Because of your own personal experiences, all of that. And so to do this work, sometimes, if I want to do training workshops, for instance, there's no way I can do that in a space where I don't speak the language. So it depends on the nature of work. Now, one example is Ishan is here, and Ishan didn't speak any Malayalam, but he had to work in Lakshadweep. And Ishan learned, I'm Malayali and I can't read, but Ishan can read now, definitely more than I can, because mine is 0. So over time, if you want to engage in a space, you do have to figure out ways to at least pick up the spoken language. But language is not necessarily a barrier to build relationships with people in these sites, and often attempts to speak a language that you don't speak very well can help you build those relationships.
Thank you, Vinita. Thank you, Marianne.
Hello.
Next question.
Magata.
Anji.
बोलिए मगता जी.
जी, आप बोला था टर्टल कंजर्वेशन के लिए नवंबर से जो हमारे टर्टल कंजर्वेशन उड़ीसा में चल रहे हैं. जो वो टाइम को जो बैन फिशरमैन है, बहुत सारे लोग खेती होता है. मेरा आइडिया है जो लॉस होता है, जो फिशिंग के लिए नहीं जा रहा है जितना लोग है, इसको कुछ होमस्टे टूरिज्म के लिए प्लानिंग कुछ करना पड़ेगा. होमस्टे टूरिज्म प्लानिंग का मतलब क्या है? जितना जो लोग टूरिस्ट आता है और ये होमस्टे में रुकेगा और फैसिलिटी के लिए थोड़ा से ये लोकल गाइड इसको लेके कुछ टर्टल देखने के लिए लेके जाएगा. इसका होमस्टे के लिए कुछ गवर्नमेंट के लिए रजिस्ट्रेशन प्लान है क्या?
Do you want me to translate it in English?
No, see, this is the thing. I think I pretty much understood what Magata ji is asking. So Magata ji, pehle wo, oh my God, now you will all see my terrible Hindi.
Tell me in English.
नहीं मैं ट्राई करूंगी हिंदी में, कोई बात नहीं. पहले वो प्लान था, रिद्धि आए थे ना उड़ीसा में वो टूरिज्म असेसमेंट के लिए, मगर उस टाइम रिद्धि का रिजल्ट्स था दैट सारे जगह में बेसिक पानी, ड्रिंकिंग वाटर फैसिलिटी नहीं है. बहुत सारे इश्यूज है वहाँ होम स्टे टूरिज्म स्टार्ट करने के लिए. ये सारे इश्यूज फर्स्ट फिक्स करना पड़ेगा, है ना, क्योंकि पानी नहीं है तो कैसे टूरिज्म कैसे कर सकते हैं. तो इसलिए हमारे इनिशिएटिव्स है वो कम्युनिटी वेलबींग प्रोग्राम में है. तो पहले ये कम्युनिटी का प्रॉब्लम्स क्या है, बेसिक प्रॉब्लम्स है ना, पानी का, sanitation का, waste का, वो सब fix करने के बाद then वो जगह में perhaps tourists आएंगे, क्योंकि अभी इस जगह में tourists attract करने के लिए थोड़ा मुश्किल है. तो ऐसे step by step हम try करेंगे, मगर वो idea है तो विनीता बोल दिया ना, community centric tourism. So community का क्या चाहिए उस तरफ tourism models build करने के लिए plans है, मगर ये सब चीज पहले fix करना पड़ेगा. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you.
ठीक है. Thank you, Magata ji.
Okay. So the next question is by Diksha. What is the importance of involving different communities for resource governance programs? It's a broad question, but
what is the importance of involving communities?
No, different communities, like multiple communities.
Okay. Yeah, Vinita, do you want to talk about? I mean, Vinita, I think talked about it. But Vinita, do you want to elaborate on your point about all coastal communities and not just fishing communities, but also other stakeholders, I guess?
Yeah, so one of the things we do when we engage in a space is to do a stakeholder mapping, stakeholder analysis to see who are the, I mean, like there is the punch. For example, if you look at Odisha, where we were working in Ganjam, there is the Panchayat, local self-government authorities, and there is the forest department, because there are turtle areas where mass turtle nesting happens. So that there is some sort of controlled by the forest authorities, and there are the revenue officials, and then there are the village committee, which is the traditional community institutions who sets the traditional norms. So all of this interacts and it gives rise to something called legal pluralism. So and in different manners, different matters they take care, and such a system coexists. So we, in our approach, we try to work with the local communities and strengthen their decision-making power, because state already has a lot of power, and most often due to legislations and all framed in, or even if they are good legislations, due to implementations, local communities are at a disadvantage. And local communities are by no means a homogeneous. I mean, different people will have different priority. In some area, some people would want to dry the fish. Other people would want to maybe set up something else. Some people might want in a school, and even there are not just directly natural resource dependent communities like fishing communities, but there are other coastal communities who the way they see the beach would be different. For them, it would be a space to, well, come and just enjoy, make noises, and so the other fishing gear and all, they may see it as an inconvenience, and there have been conflicts, and there have been instances of fishing boats were burned, and we still don't know who did the burning, and despite complaining. So to work in such a space, you cannot, it has to be everybody has to understand that these spaces are common. So any ecological damage, that everybody will suffer equally, because you are all living near to it, and any developmental activity will impact everybody equally. And as I say, when a common enemy comes, like when the waste was dumped in Purnabandha, both the fishing community and the non-fishing community came together, and the non-fishing community offered support to the village committee of the Purnabandha. Hey, we are right behind you. We will take this up and we'll fight against the municipality. So, I mean, so this realization, of course, when there is a threat, it happens. But in the absence of a threat, you had to talk to people. You had to explain, hey, this might happen. Hey, this is the law. These are the side effects. And for example, like fishers from Nuagaon may want to build a harbor in the area of Purnabandha, but Purnabandha people might be impacted, that it might be ecologically harmful. So you have to talk to people. At the same time, you have to do it in a manner that you don't take leadership. You shouldn't take leadership. You are just a facility. You just try to, like a middleman, facilitate a space so that, and you give them what is called your understanding you have, you share with them the scientific things, so that you help them. You are just a helper to let communities take decision. So even so, like if we want to say stop the some of the youth from non-fishing communities maybe got drunk and maybe made some issues in the beach. How do you stop them? You work with them. You work with their community leaders. You make use of the existing linkages, giving and taking between communities who are nearby. So that is why we always think of it as there is of course co-management where local communities share the governance manage with the state. But before the co-management, there is a step called participatory management, where the different communities, and even within the fishing community, there are people who want, there would be people who prefer a certain net, there would be people who don't want a certain net because they think it would be destructive for juvenile fishes. And so you have to work together with everybody. And I think it's very difficult, but I believe as long as you're quite open, straightforward, and yeah, you can do this.
Thank you, Vinita. We'll just take one more question and then we can wrap up the session. So this question is by Sarah. She has asked, how do fisher folk bolster their socio-ecological resilience to future-proof themselves and their livelihoods in a time like this?
It's a very big question, because it's, in a way, it's like asking how do any of us future-proof ourselves, right? Because there are certain things that nobody can predict, like this pandemic, that no one was prepared for. But at the same time, there is a basic level of security that a lot of us enjoy that fishing communities don't enjoy. And it's not so much how do they bolster themselves, it is how can we as a community and as a public ensure that they have these basic rights to land, to clean drinking water, to sanitation, or the kinds of things the community well-being program talked about. But also land, right? A lot of fishing communities don't own rights to the lands on which their houses are. And so if there is a development project that's coming up, because they don't own that land, it's easy to evict them from these spaces. And there are many instances of such evictions. So it's very difficult for a marginalized community by itself to bolster from these much larger external forces, right? Government, market, industry, these are things that even you or I would not be able to fight against if those forces were directed against us. And so it's a very, that's also a difficult question for me to answer. And if Aarti and Vinita, if you want to add something here, but I think that's what we're trying to do, and that's the reason we have kind of explicitly expanded from governance of natural resources, fisheries management, marine kind of conservation, to starting this community well-being program, because you need to ensure that these communities have all of these these needs met, because only then will they have any sort of resilience when there are expected things like a sudden health scare to unexpected things like like a pandemic. Aarti, Vinita?
Yeah, maybe just to add one really tiny thing that, just to remind you of that term environmental justice, I think our orientation in the organization itself broadly is, it's not so much like, okay, what can communities do to take care of themselves? As Marianne says, the idea of justice is to also see why it is that they are marginalized the way they are. And what is it, and who has then a responsibility to do something about it, right? So I think that orientation is something that we need to bring more and more, both to ourselves as conservationists, but also to the wider conservation group or the wider conservation community, that somehow thinks that, it's still, there are lots of people who think, they have to be educated to learn how to do these things, without actually seeing why is it that some of these miserable situations actually exist and who's responsible for it. So I think that's one important aspect of the justice element, is to really see who all should bear that responsibility. Anything to add, Vinita?
Yeah, I agree with both Marian and you that for that there should be combination of community well-being as well as better control of resource governance. Ideally, for fishing communities, I think I mean like how NFF and other organization has been proposing for quite some time, the rights similar to the Forest Right Act, the marine the rights of uh, it is a big name, okay, I forgot. It is something like rights over coastal and marine commons for traditional fishing communities and other customary coastal communities or something. That was what I remember from one of the NFF meetings. It has to be implemented, because how are you going to be able to future proof yourself if the even despite that it being an ecologically sensitive area that with high possibilities of erosion, when developmental projects are going ahead with port expansion, if you look at the Vinyam port in Kerala, and there is accretion is even there where there is I mean, there is will be erosion on one side, there is accretion on one side. How are you going to future-proof yourself if you don't have control, if you don't get control over the decision making? And then there comes the other counterpart. How are you going to even if you have control, you need to have better access to healthcare facilities. You need to have better access to information, and there is other thing that information is also important, because a lot of communities will see demanding for sea walls, and but there are of course biological alternatives, but when people are there desperate situation they demand sea walls. When things are really worse, sea walls, coastal walls are the only solution that's there. So we have to look at it in a holistic manner where people are able to, firstly, they should have the basic facilities of life, just like everybody in the mainlands. They should have good quality access to education, healthcare, and everything. In addition to that, considering that they are living in ecologically sensitive area, and considering that they are natural resource dependent, and considering that they are at the forefront of impacts of climate change, better decentralization. By decentralization here, I am not referring to local self-governance decentralization. While there are, of course, provisions available in local Panchayati Raj Act and Municipality Act to conserve the coastal commons, most often what happens is the elite capture happens. So the voices of the natural resource dependent communities, be they Adivasis or fish workers, get drowned out by the mainstream interest. So empowering their community institutions, like we have talked about, that is also necessary.
विनीता,
जी,
आरती, ये लास्ट क्वेश्चन है, क्योंकि हम एक सीआरजेड में एक मैप बनाया था, ये हमारा जेटी का पास है। विनीता ध्यान से सुनिए, जो हम पहले ये कॉमन लैंड ऊपर में हम सीआरजेड में थर्ड कैटेगरी में ये कुछ इलीगली में डंपिंग वर्ड पहले बना था। अभी हम एक दिन कलेक्टर का पास जाके, ये एक मीटिंग था सीआरजेड के लिए, मैं उधर वो कलेक्टर ऑफिस में फिशरी डिपार्टमेंट और फॉरेस्ट डीएफओ और तहसीलदार और आरई सभी लोग प्रेजेंट में था, और सीआरजेड का शेड्यूल 3 में ये हमारा डंपिंग के लिए बनाने के लिए बंद है। लेकिन अभी मेरा जान थोड़ा सा खतरा में, ये बोलने का बहुत डिटेल बोल नहीं सकता है, क्योंकि अभी पॉलिटिकल बहुत अच्छा लीडर चलता है। हमारा जेटी का पास एक कॉमन लैंड में अभी दूसरा बार 2 करोड़ का डंपिंग वार्ड एनएसी बनाती है, और ये हम भी जाके पहले बोला था। रवि तो ये बारे में बहुत फाइट करता है, क्योंकि मैं अभी विलेज का प्रेसिडेंट है, थोड़ा सा मैं डिसिप्लिन से रहना पड़ेगा। और क्या होता है, बहुत सारा पॉलिटिकल आके अभी भी काम शुरू करता है, अभी कर दिया। हम भी आरए को बोला ये सीआरजेड में थर्ड कैटेगरी के ये होने का चांस नहीं है। 15 मीटर में अभी भी काम शुरू होता है। मैं आपको फोटो भेजेगा, आज भी एक न्यूज में इंडियन एक्सप्रेस में आ जाया था। इस बारे में हम विश्वजीत महंती के साथ बात किया था, और मेराइन प्रताप महंती के साथ बात कर रहा है, और दिवेश मांडव के साथ कल एक आर्टिकल आया था। क्योंकि 94-93 में हमारा एक गोकुरगुदा में एक एक्वाकल्चर के लिए एक प्लानिंग था। वो टाइम को एनजीटी ग्रीन ट्रिब्यूनल पका के बाबुली एक रिपोर्टर था, अभी बंद हो गया। दूसरा सेकंड बार में जब हमारा 50 मीटर में जो डंपिंग हुआ था, उधर भी कलेक्टर और डीएफओ, फिशरी डीएफओ, फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट डीएफओ, तहसीलदार सभी लोग था के एक सीआरजेड का रूल पूरा तहसीलदार को दिया था। देने का बाद वो डंपिंग पूरा बंद हो गया। बंद होने का बाद अभी 2 बार दूसरा अभी भी काम शुरू हो गया हमारा साइड पे। आज भी एक इंडियन एक्सप्रेस पे न्यूज आया था। मेरा बोलने का चांस है, मैं भी विश्व को भी बोला था। विश्व बोला ठीक है, हम ये जाके आर्य के साथ आर्य को बोला था। आज भी एक रवि बोला आर्य को, ये क्यों ये 50 मीटर में सभी aquaculture का ब्राउन नेचर पूरा तोड़ दिया, और ये हमारा लिए क्यों इधर डंपिंग बनाते। डंपिंग बनने का बाद हमारा टर्टल कंजर्वेशन के लिए बहुत प्रॉब्लम होता है। फिशिंग कम्युनिटी का एससीजी के लिए बहुत प्रॉब्लम होता है, क्योंकि वो कॉमन लैंड हमारे लिए काम आएगा। जब कुछ फंडिंग आएगा तो जेटी का पास कॉमन लैंड के लिए हमारा थोड़ा से ड्राई फिश के लिए कुछ बड़ा जेटी होगा। विनीता जी,
विश्व ने मुझे कॉल किया, उन्होंने बोला पंचायत में उनको कोई रिप्लाई नहीं मिला। मैंने बोला वार्ड मेंबर जी ना आपके एरिया में, उनको पंचायत को एक फॉर्मल रिक्वेस्ट देने के लिए क्या क्या इंफॉर्मेशन चाहिए। हम लोग एनजीटी जाने के पहले हमको सभी इंफॉर्मेशन कलेक्ट करना जरूरत है। एक्सैक्ट जीआरजेड एरिया क्या है, उसका रेवेन्यू में कोई क्लासिफिकेशन क्या है। अभी हमारे के पास मैप है, विश्व आप फ्री टाइम में मैप में चेक करेगा रेवेन्यू में वो उनका क्लासिफिकेशन क्या है। बिकॉज थोड़ा एरिया मैंने पहला बोला है ना, कॉमन लैंड है, उनको डाइवर्शन का प्रॉब्लम है, सीआरजेड है। और ये जानकारी हमारे पास तो हमको एक कोई थोड़ा इंफॉर्मेशन मिसिंग है तो उसके लिए आरटीआई फाइल कीजिए। सभी जानकारी हमें पास ठीक है तो मैंने सोचा है एनजीटी जाने के लिए जाने चाहते थे तो ठीक है, बट उसके पहले सभी इंफॉर्मेशन कलेक्ट करना जरूरत है। और विश्वा ने मुझे बोला वो ओडिशा कोस्टल जोन मैनेजमेंट अथॉरिटी का वेबसाइट में लेटेस्ट CZMB मैप नहीं है। ये है तो पहला हम लोग मेल करना जरूरत है। मेल करने के बाद वो रेस्पॉन्ड नहीं करते तो बिकॉज मैंने भी डाउनलोड करने के लिए शुरू किया, बट पूर्णबंधक का मैप मुझे भी नहीं मिला। सो एक आरटीआई भी फाइल करना जरूरत है। हमारे पास सभी इंफॉर्मेशन है तो मैंने सोचा है एनजीटी जाने ठीक है, बट
और एक बात है जी, ये डंपिंग के बारे में हम सरपंच के साथ भी बात किया था विनीता जी। हम भी सरपंच के साथ बात किया था। वो बोला ये डंपिंग एनईसी के लिए नहीं, ये पंचायत के लिए आया है। हम जाके अर्बन में टेस्ट देखा, ये अर्बन का डंपिंग है, ये पंचायत का डंपिंग नहीं है। और सरपंच बोला जी पंचायत में जो डंपिंग जो है ना, जो गार्बेज है, वो सभी गार्बेज उधर ही जाके आपके लिए सभी के लिए ये हो रहा है। हम बोला ठीक है जी, क्या करेगा। अभी तो आज भी एक न्यूज में आया था, इंडियन एक्सप्रेस में, आप देखो अभी से एक न्यूज किया था, और भी अभी भी चल रहा है न्यूज पेपर। हम बोलना चाहिए क्योंकि सीआरजेड में एक्वाकल्चर सब टूट लिया, ये भी होना चाहिए।
और पंचायत और म्युनिसिपैलिटी डंपिंग करने के बाद उनका पोल्यूशन कंट्रोल बोर्ड का परमिशन भी जरूरत है। आप उनको पूछ कीजिए।
नहीं, कल हम एनएसी रवि जी कल जाके पूछा था एग्जीक्यूटिव ऑफिसर के लिए।
Tell them to show the pollution control board certificate also once that because then we have all the information when we
संगीता जी, ये हम डिटेल में बात करूंगी क्योंकि एक्चुअली बहुत सारा चीज डिस्कस करना पड़ेगा ना इस टॉपिक में। तो ये मीटिंग के बाद बिस्वा का नंबर है, विनीता का नंबर है, सब लोग का कांटेक्ट नंबर है ना।
ये विनीता आया था ना, इसलिए मैं बात
हाँ, तो हम बिल्कुल डिस्कस करेंगे इस क्योंकि हमारे अभी तो टाइम भी खत्म हुआ, तो बिल्कुल डिस्कस करेंगे बाद में, ठीक है?
ओके, थैंक यू।
बिकॉज बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट इशू है और अच्छे से एग्जाम्पल है एक्चुअली फॉर एवरीबडी हियर। दिस इज अ वेरी गुड, in a way you're getting a real life example of some of the issues that are there in coastal areas and the complexities of trying to resolve them, right? Like the different types of information you have to gather to figure out whether this is legal or illegal. It's not a straightforward way of even figuring out what your next step needs to be. And so thank you Magata ji पूछने के लिए, क्योंकि सब लोग को ऐसा एग्जाम्पल भी मिला which हम नहीं प्लान किया है ऐसे, Magar, so yes, so I think that, I mean, hopefully that gives actually everyone more insight than even the way that we've been answering some of your questions. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, right,
Marian,
Pragya? Yeah, sorry,
hello.
Vinita,
I
go
have
ahead.
one clarification, not related to this. So
Oh,
in the
okay.
beginning, when I started the presentation, I was a bit nervous. So I mean, I said like Bengali fishes of Odia. I mean, later I corrected Bengali origin, but still I want to emphasize it.
Sure.
They migrated long back, and similarly, Telugu origin fishers also migrated long back. And in some cases, even migration was not there because after the state reorganization, state boundaries and all got changed, and there had been a lot of cultural mixing. Even the Odia spoken in Ganjam is currently has a bit of a Telugu, Telugu slang or whatever. So I mean, I just felt it was important to emphasize this
No,
at a
it's a
time.
very good
If
point
this
because
group of
sometimes
people are called into question, we shouldn't leave ourselves open to interpretation.
absolutely.
Their citizenship is absolutely not under question.
Yeah, thanks, Vinita. Because yeah, these sort of identities can become targets of discrimination. So thank you for clarifying that. Pragya, is there anything that we absolutely should answer before we? There is a plan for how we reach out to everybody else, right?
Yeah, so all the questions that have not been answered, we will email the answers to everyone else. And yeah, I think everyone who is there in the audience, I think we've addressed all of their questions. So we could wrap it up, Marianne.
Okay, then, I mean, there's not much to say. Thank you all for joining us, those who've joined us for this session, those of you who've given us, the entire day or Saturday, thanks very much. If you have any feedback of, like this is the first time we're doing something like this as an organization, having the different programs, interact with people. I mean, ideally would have loved to do this in person rather than online, but online also just means we're accessible to more people than those who are Bangalore based. But yeah, if you have any suggestions, please let us know on our social media. You can, reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and just let us know if there's ways that we could do this better next time, if there's other things that you'd like us to be doing when we have these types of events. We don't have any plans for something similar to this immediately, but so all of your ideas would be really useful. So quickly, thanks to all the programs, and thanks to Pragya and Namrata, who thought of this event to kind of mark Dakshin's birthday and got us to do something different. So thanks to them for thinking of this and doing all of the coordination for today. And thanks to the programs for kind of cooperating with this idea when it was put on them with not too much notice, actually. So for then thinking of what they were going to do in their 1 hour slots. So thanks to all of them, thanks to all of you, and hopefully we will see all of you soon in some way or the other. So thanks everybody, have a good weekend. That's pretty much it from us. And we will load this on our YouTube. You can go look at it later. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.